Formula Access. Yeah, again, I got a really special guest. I know I always say that. That's what I got. If I'm being totally honest with each of you guys, I wasn't exactly expecting this guest to be what he was. Today we have Jan Lefort. Jan was formerly the head of partnerships for Alfa Romeo, the Sauber Group, which is soon to be Audi. I also learned that he is the former manager of Jacques Villeneuve. I had no idea, you guys, any of this stuff, which is funny because I request these guests based upon their most recent employer, and as I start to do my diligence, investigating, whatever you want to call it, before the show, these things get uncovered, and then they get uncovered during the conversation as well. Jan was one of very few people to send me some information about him and his history, and I read it and I was just floored. And he's just a very articulate, very professional, very informative, very educational. You guys, this guy's been in the industry for a long time. He's got some amazing stories of the paddock and the glitz and the glam and the business and everything behind the scenes that we all want to learn as fans. So, you guys, seriously, grab a cup of coffee, grab a cup of tea, enjoy yourselves. This, again, is worth your time. Formula Access, welcome. We bring the people of motorsports to your doorstep. Today we have a really special guest, a guest that I connected to on LinkedIn. He reached out to me. I really had no idea what he did. I mean, I understood it from a really high level, and he started emailing me like very succinct and very detailed descriptions of what he wanted to talk about. And out of the 30 to 40 guests that I have recorded so far, there's been two people that have been unbelievably prepared for a conversation and an outline, and makes my job really, really easy. So today we have an awesome guest. We have Jan Lefort, formerly of Sauber. He is the first guest that we have been able to get on the show from Sauber. They have pushed me off until 2023. I guess they have to focus on racing or something, but Jan, thank you for coming on.
You're welcome, Ryan. Pleasure. It's a pleasure.
I really appreciate when people not only take the time to come on the show, because it's an hour and a half, 2 hours out of your day, but also, I don't know, maybe it's the professional in me, but like I appreciate when somebody is like, here's what I'd like to talk about. Here's what I've done. Here's where I think we can provide value for your podcast, which is like, wow, okay, I appreciate that. Like, you are a commercial guy.
I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think there's also an element of passion that we both share, and I think the audience will also has this passion for the sport, for the business that's around the sport, all these topics that are behind the scenes, and it's extremely exciting. So I think, first of all, concerning myself, and it's really about the passion. So if I can share a little bit of my passion and a little bit of my experience with you and your audience, I'm super happy.
We appreciate it because I've gotten into this in previous episodes, but Drive to Survive does an unbelievable job of like, here's the driver in that car and that helmet that you see during a race. Here's who they are personally, and we're allowing you into their lives as well as the team managers. But there's 1,000+ people per team that make all that happen, and people are starved to meet those people. And I think you're right. I've never talked to anybody on this show that's not just extremely passionate and would probably do their job for free if it was possible. And I honestly, like, I could not record these and just have these conversations every day, because it motivates me to just be like, okay, this is what the highest level of people look like. and you're one of them. You're a commercial guy. Like, we speak the same language. So this is the conversation that I strive to have. And I think like my network of, business owners and leaders, they love this stuff because they're like, oh, okay, wow. Is John looking for a job? Because we need those kinds of people.
We'll try to give them some crispy information, or at least some interesting stuff to chew on, mentally.
So, just to update the audience, because I know who you are and I know what you do, and I have a huge list of stuff, of accomplishments. Let the audience know who you are and what do you do in the sport.
Well, who am I? First of all, I'm a French guy. I'm currently based in Switzerland, where actually Sauber is based. For those who don't know, Sauber is close to Zurich, to north of Switzerland. The company was built and created by a guy called Peter Sauber. He is himself a Swiss guy, very Swiss, extremely, how can I say, understated in everything he was doing. He was very discreet. He built this incredible company over 50 years ago. And I've joined the company in 2018. So we'll come back on all the details of this company. And by the way, Sauber, just to pick up on what you said earlier, but Sauber is 550 employees altogether, which is what we consider a small team. And probably during the conversation today, I'll refer to small teams versus big teams. That's another point we can also discuss later. But yeah, I'm French. I've started in working in this business in '94. Joined Williams as a junior PR guy, working for one of the sponsors there. And it was the time, if people remember, when Ayrton Senna was still driving. So I arrived in this team. I remember the first Grand Prix of the season was in Brazil. So I traveled, half the world with my little suitcase, carrying a printer and the first laptop, which was huge, And I had a garage tour, and I was brought into this, the garage where there was Senna's car on one side and Damon Hill's car on the other, both world champions at some point. And it was how I started in this world, and I've stayed working for Williams for 6 years altogether. And then I was poached by another big brand. I don't know if I can mention it was a British American tobacco brand. It was a big sponsor in F1, and their strategy in Formula One was actually all what we call the lifestyle aspects of the sport. They didn't really care. I mean, their audience and their target audience didn't really care about the number of cylinders, the number of tires that the cars were using, but they were more interested in the lifestyle aspect. What we call the lifestyle at the time was already a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. So my approach to Formula One was really much that. I'm not a technical guy. Actually, I'm still really not. I know a little bit of what's going on in the background of a Formula One team, but it's a fraction of what actually is going on. I'm really passionate about marketing, telling stories, content, and all that. And this is how I developed now at BAR, British American Racing. And then after another 6 years, I was in contact with a guy called Jacques Villeneuve, who actually won the championship with Williams. And he was also racing for BAR, and we were actually friends. We used to hang around. We actually have the same age, the same haircut. And we both speak French, so we were connected, and I became kind of his, manager when he actually continued his career at Sauber, funny enough, and which became BMW. We can talk about this later if you want, but at some point, Sauber was owned by BMW, and this is how I continued my career in the sport, but as a guy traveling the world with an athlete, and which was a different kind of job, extremely interesting, very intense. You completely live the life of a Formula One driver, which sometimes personally is a bit. It's a bit of a complicated because you have to remember that the real life, which is your own life, is actually not the driver's life. So it's an interesting one, but it's that's how it happened, and then I managed to step out of the sport for not very long, and you will see the story. I've joined in 2010. I've joined a company called IWC, which is a watch brand, a luxury watch brand, which is a part of the Richemont Group. And Richemont Group, I'm sure it will trigger a few connections to some people, because it's the same group that owns Cartier, for example, or Montblanc, which are bigger brands, especially in the US. But IWC is based in Switzerland, close to Zurich, and this is how I ended up here. And I remember the boss I had then, he is actually now the CEO of Breitling, said during a press conference, it was on my second day there, I was managing all the partnerships for the brand. They were not in motorsport, they were in a lot of other things, but not in motorsport. And I remember the CEO said, to the press, in public, he said, this is how we do it at IWC. This is what the brand stands for. These are the key messages and values. And for example, we will never be in Formula One because this is not for us. A year later, I was signing a contract with Mercedes, and Lewis Hamilton, who became the brand ambassador. So I was back in Formula One in a different kind of aspect as a sponsor, representing a sponsor. But funny enough, Mercedes is the team which actually was former BAR team. So a lot of people in Mercedes was people I used to work with when I was at BAR, So again, back in Formula One, in a different kind of format. And then I left IWC in 2018 and joined Sauber to be now working directly for a Formula One team. So Sauber is this team that I talked about earlier. It's just over 50 years old, which has been bought by a privateer, a family office in 2017, and actually sponsored by Alfa Romeo, the car brand from Italy. Hence the name Alfa Romeo F1 team. So actually it's a pure commercial kind of thing, but the name was sold to them. So the team name was Alfa Romeo F1 team, but the company remained as Sauber. So we were all employed by Sauber. And now Sauber, to close the loop, Sauber has been bought by Audi, and so a new era for the company is starting as of 1st of January, basically in a few days to come. Very interesting story.
I love how succinct you are in your story. Like the ADD entrepreneur in me is like all over the place, and you're like this. It's so succinct and perfect, and like you tie in all the details that viewers and fans get. And I just thank you for that description.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks.
You've been, and it's always been, whether it's been in Formula One or it's been with luxury brands, it's been in the partnership sponsorship piece, right?
Absolutely.
That is like to me, I feel like even people in motorsports, that's like the 1,000-armed monster. Like it is so many things. Like I think people think of sponsorship as a logo on a car, and they think of a partnership as like cognizant. It's like that's the security tech or data center for Aston Martin. And so, but it's so much more than that. Like kind of get into what that actually means. Like what do you do for Sauber?
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for pointing out the sponsorship guy that I am, which is more marketing than the pure sales guy. So I've got this expertise in actually building sponsorship programs in the sport. I agree with you that it's a lot more. First of all, if you don't mind, I'd like maybe to come back and give maybe a basis on how to consider the sport, and I think you can transfer this kind of concept to other sports. But I can speak about Formula One. I could not speak too much about any kind of other sports, football, NFL, whatever, because I don't have the experience. But let's say it's just not Formula One. You have to consider that the sport is a platform. If you think marketing, purely marketing, it's a platform on which you can build many campaigns, many things which are linked to any kind of marketing campaigns. Could be a digit, could be advertising, could be events, live marketing, hospitality, whatever. Usually it's a mix of everything, but you have to think about this first. So once you understand that this platform can actually deliver quite a lot for your brand, it's for you to actually, as a sponsor, to build a relevant program going forward. But what's really interesting is that in the same sport, using the same platform, so a Formula One car, a couple of drivers, engineers, a factory, races around the world, you have brands which are cognizant, extremely tech brands. You've got crypto, you've got beer, you've got soft drinks, you've got energy drinks, you know. So the same platform, but is used to tell different stories. So what I'm trying to say is the activation, what we call the activation program. So how do you bring your partnership to life, your sponsorship to life, is actually what's going to deliver the value for your brand. And this is what I do in a nutshell. But that's what is extremely interesting in the sport is that you have, I don't know, thousands of, probably thousands of brands. We'll have to. It would be interesting to count one day, but I'm sure you probably reach 1,000 of brands, different kind of industry, using the same assets to tell different stories and to deliver different campaigns. So I think this is the starting point, and then we can of course together drill into if you're interested into specifics, but the key is to understand that we always said, as a brand, and I'm talking not as the team guy, but as a brand guy, the brand should be. You always have to make sure that the brand is bigger than the sport. When you're in the Formula One team, you try to sell your assets, so you constantly have to reinvent yourself. And adapt yourself to the market, to your clients, to your customers, the sponsors, with what they actually need to deliver, their programs, to speak to their consumers, to sell a new product, to address a new market, etc. So I think it's a different kind of way of seeing things, but at the end, you're still using the same assets. It's the basic is the car, the logo that you talked about, that's the visibility. Access to the drivers, that's the human connection, the events, that's the experience, the smell, the noise, the experience, the thrill that you get. Getting into a Formula One garage is absolutely incredible. Whether you like the sport, you like cars or not, it has this aesthetic, it's beautiful, it has a lot of colors, it's full of energy and tension and everything, so it does, triggers a lot of emotion. But all this is used to create a marketing kind of, mix of activities to bring your sponsorship to life. And that's the basic. And you need to understand this before we start talking into details.
Yeah, no, I actually appreciate the description of what activation actually means. I think when you say that word or you hear that word, people are like, what? What are we activating? Yeah. And it's such a synonymous term in marketing and, and this whole commercial. I always call it commercial because I feel like, you're not building the car, you're not engineering the car, you're managing commercial relationships. And I appreciate that because I think the audience, they get lost. And I think people in the sport get lost when it comes to sponsorships. And I think sponsorship prospects and targets don't understand the impact that their logo or their kind of activation impacts the sport and the drivers. I mean, when you think of Formula One, you know, it's one thing, or IndyCar, it's one thing. But when you think of sponsorships to drivers coming up the Formula Series, you know, that's everything. You don't get a Lewis Hamilton unless these companies are, you know, standing in their corner, you know, when they're 10 years old. And I feel like a lot of companies lose sight of that. I don't think they get it or have much experience around that, but, you know, what I've kind of learned and understood is how important that the sponsorships can be to the bottom line of the business.
Yeah.
You know, I've said this 100 times on the show, but I went to St. Pete with the Andrettis, and, you know, I was in their hospitality, and I had heard a young driver tell me, you know, I was like, what's your value prop? Why do people want to write you a check? You know, and he was like, well, you know, the business to business. And I was like, oh, whatever. Okay. And then I was sitting in Andretti hospitality having lunch, and what do you do? What do you do? How do you do? Wait, marketing. I need marketing. I need a web. You know, it's like all of a sudden, all this business is taking place while my mouth is full of food, you know, and my wife is like, you know, getting business cards and customers, and, you know, just like all this stuff was taking place, but it wasn't like a sale. You know, when you go and you cold call somebody and knock on the door and you're like, hey, I'm Ryan, and this is what I do. This is the product that you need. It's really different when you're in this atmosphere that you're all really passionate about or having a lot of fun. It's like it sits in the background and kind of sneaks into the conversation, and it's really powerful. I wish more companies would pay attention to that, because I think you'd foster a healthier driver market.
Yeah, I think Brian's a difficult one, because first of all, the marketeers or the people in charge of doing that kind of job, they're always required to deliver their analytics, their evaluation, their numbers, to prove with 250 slides that it's the right choice, compared to some other kind of campaign or investment. And it's always a lot of money. If you think number, it's a big money. But if you think, if you put the number in perspective, it's extremely efficient. And first of all, there are three things. The first thing is to answer directly that point. If it was not efficient, and the investment of being a sponsor in Formula One was a stupid idea, then you're questioning the 1,000 people or more that have already invested in the sport and at massive level. And usually the companies in the sport are not the grocery store at the corner of the road. It's usually multinational. So they have this ability to anticipate, to manage, and to make sure that the return on investment is worth. So I think it's a no-brainer. And it would be easy as a sales guy to say, you know what, let's not talk about if F1 is good or not. It's obvious. You talked about the cognition. Why would there be in F1 if it wasn't good? Number two, to come back on the emotion, the emotional aspect of this business. I would treat sponsorship conceptualize sponsorship like a relationship. If you meet someone, the first date is going to be about discovery, but interest. But you don't really go into the full understanding of the person, of his universe, family, friends. It takes time to develop a relationship, and I think it's the same when you enter a sponsorship deal. You have to go to this first date, commit. But then you have to learn how to actually get, the most out of this relationship, because you start to understand the details and what's efficient for you, what's not. So you start to be more clever about the whole thing going forward. And the last thing I wanted to say is to come back on when you said, I wish some people understood a little bit more. the thing is, it's very difficult because you have very clever people on the other side of the table. And if you compare F1 from the 90s to now, I think the main difference when you're asking to invest is you have to prove a lot of you have to prove that it's working with numbers, analytics. They have access directly to their target audience via social media, so that dialogue is instant. If you post something, you know exactly within 2 hours whether it's good or not. Whether in the 90s, Formula One was sold based on the number of viewers we had on television. So the former era was basically, okay, I've signed 220 contracts around the world with 220 broadcasters. Each broadcaster accumulates an amount of X number of viewers. So there was, a way of calculating how many people, were watching, what time they were watching, because we knew that the race was at 2:00 in Europe, etc. If you put an ad on TV at that time of the day, this is how much this ad would cost. So your logo appearing X minutes on TV was worth X. So you had a way of calculating, and the evaluation of your sponsorship was done like that. But of course, with digital and all the new tools that we were able to develop with the years, and especially social media, you create new ways of evaluating your sponsorship. And therefore, I think not only it's you've got to go beyond the emotional aspect, which we talked about, this relationship, but you have also to prove that it's worth it with numbers, with research, with all sorts of analytics and numbers and stuff. And this is what potentially is harder today, because I always consider that the people on the other side of the table, when you're in Formula One team, not when you're a sponsor, but when you're at the Formula One team and you try to sell the sponsorship, on the other side you have extremely clever people, and people who know exactly what they want. They know precisely what they need for their brand, because they have their strategy in place. They know exactly which country, which sort of target consumers, what's the content need to look like. So they actually challenge you. And what this has done is it has forced the teams to sell differently, to adapt, to be a lot more flexible. Before, you had one package. Basically, you had your logo on the car, an appearance with the driver, few passes to get to access the paddock. That was your package. Now you start about, how many posts can I get? Can you create content? Can you get behind the scenes for me? Can you get the drivers to say, and you have to adapt. Each contract is actually, you have a backbone which is pretty much the same, but actually there's a huge chunk now which is bespoke for each of the sponsors, because one is going to sell beer, the other one is going to sell cloud storage and so on. So it's very different.
Do you find, because I think marketing and kind of the marketing end of sponsorships, because you're selling to like the chief marketing officer or somebody who's responsible for that brand's marketing to connect over. When you approach a client for marketing and you're relying on social media and Google and whatnot, there's always a ramp period. You talked about it earlier. You said there's kind of there's a discovery, there's a dating period where you're kind of testing the water. Here's a post here. We're going to do a post like this on Facebook. We're going to do it like this on Twitter. We're going to do it like this on TikTok. And you're just kind of testing and feeling the waters out, because it does trigger really fast once you get it.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people's expectation of that ROI or those analytics are viral. I want to put Cognizant on the side of an Aston Martin. And then I want I want the phones to ring off the hook. I want my emails to go off and my social media to just go berserk. And it doesn't work like that. There is a ramp period.
Absolutely.
The same, I would imagine, exists when you chuck a logo on a Formula One car. If you're not seeking the experience side of it.
Yeah. No, Ryan, I think you're spot on. But it's a nature of the current era of everything needs to be instant. You click on the button and then suddenly you have your hamburger delivered at your door. So this is how people actually function at this speed. But you're completely right, especially when you consider the investment of that kind of amount, because we're talking big money, big investment. It means big resources behind. It's a Formula One is fast, but a Formula One car is fast for sure. But I think it's a big machine. It needs the momentum. It needs the traction. So you need to test. Yeah, you can put a logo on the social media, your logo on the social media channel of the team, and you will see that the fans who are actually following the teams see right through it, and they think it's too commercial, so they're going to destroy it. So it's not relevant, or it's not good. It's not playing in your favor. So what you discover is that I need to create content that is relevant for the audience with my brand, etc. And then you start being clever about it, and this is how you learn in the process. Instead of asking the team, hey, can you put a post with my logo on your channels, because then I want to reach instantly, a few thousand that I can deliver to my boss. Hey, look, the investment we've done is working. Actually, it's not. So the activation, to go back to that word earlier, is bringing the sponsorship to life, means that you also need to invest strategically behind a sponsorship deal. I always try to, I'm not saying it like this to people I talk to, but I say don't expect that this is going to work for itself. Mm-hmm. We are offering you a toolbox. Make it simple. If you have a nail and a hammer in the toolbox, the nail is not going to go in the wall by itself. You need to use it. And probably you're going to hurt your finger on the process. It's going to hurt, but at the end it's going to take an effort, and that resource that you put behind the effort, it's the same in sponsorship. You need to have people to take care of your guests, create content, write the strategy, evaluate the strategy, steer the strategy in a different way if it doesn't work. If something happens in the world that you haven't controlled, foreseen, this is the I think this is the most important part in sponsorship, is the activation, because this is what brings value, and the resource that is actually connected to that to that effort needs to be considered straight from the beginning.
You're really good at what you do. Okay.
That said, Ryan, I've actually another point to finish off on that one, because that was a very interesting question. I think that teams more and more do act as an activation. Let me make a simple word. Sometimes the teams act as an agency. They come up with the ideas. And I think it's not negative to say this. It's just I'm saying that the teams have the expertise now, because they have worked with so many brands, so different industries, business categories and all that. They can actually give a hint to the brands and say, you should try this. Don't ask us to put your logo on our Instagram feed. It doesn't work. Trust us, So you become more than just that Formula One team that's just building a car and goes racing. You become a consulting agency, a marketing agency. Sometimes you develop a campaign, and sometimes you actually even execute a campaign. I've been in a situation where we're actually shooting campaigns for big, like advertising campaigns in the factory on behalf of brands, using our production team and local resources. So it's a new job that the teams were forced to develop in the 4, 5, 6 years, 5 years max, and I think this is due mainly of the fact that we're much more open to digital, or actually marketing has shifted to digital. And look, even F1 as the product, what developed for me the two things that made Formula One what it is today is OTT digital, so basically Netflix, to make it simple, and B, the new cost cap. We can talk about this later. That's more a team thing, but the limit that is put onto teams, how much they can invest, or actually spend on, not invest, but spend on running the car. Those two aspects were the foundation of the success of the sport today. And the third aspect is sustainability. That F1 has taken into account, embedded into their strategy and their development, technology, how they go racing, etc., sustainability. This mix of the three components made the sport one of the, it's really the hot product today on the planet. When you think that Vegas is going to sell tickets at I don't know how many thousands of dollars. I mean, there was another post I saw the other day, something crazy. So this is really changed the sport.
Yeah, look, you've got the only sport in the world that is actually growing from a fan base standpoint. It is the most engaged social media platform in the world. I think there's over 1 billion people engaging in social media for Formula One, and that's every other major sport is declining or flatlined, and motorsports, Formula One has taken off. IndyCar has kind of caught the coattails of that, and I think it's a prime time. That Vegas is amazing. I mean, you can, if you're an individual, you can get tickets for $1,000 or $900.
Right.
If you're a corporation, I saw something like $5 million tickets or something like that.
Yes.
Of course, that's an experience. That's not a ticket. So,
now I think you're right by pointing out this topic, because it's very interesting, because it's happened in 4 years.
Yeah,
it's super quick. I would just put one point on this. It's remember where we came from.
Yeah.
We had, so maybe it's easy to have a steep curve when you come from zero. When I'm talking about social media, I remember when I in the 90s, 2000s, under the Eccleston era, you could not do anything even close to what F1 is doing now. Actually, a very interesting anecdote is when Netflix started to come into the paddock. There were huge discussions. In between the different bosses in teams, because first of all, they were not used to have cameras constantly behind their back and microphones above. It was something really not really comfortable for most of the people. But number two, they didn't understand at the beginning, because it was just a culture shock, that a company like Netflix did not pay like other broadcasters the rights to be in the paddock. They had the rights to produce and to film behind the scenes, and sometimes have access to areas where broadcasters who were in the sports for decades were paying sometimes millions, and sometimes over 100 millions, to be there. Didn't have the same access. That turned people completely nuts. So we, the marketing guys and communication guys, had to actually reconfort. I don't know if you say this word in English, but reassure people it's going to be okay. We're going to control the access. We had to make sure with Netflix that we checked everything and that our bosses were happy, and there were clashes. And this is why you probably remember some teams were not there in the first seasons. Yep. Some teams realized that it was good on second season, but some teams dropped. But in the end, 3 years down the line, fans in the US And Brian, I've been in the US since Indy, when F1 was in Indy. Remember that's a scandal.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. I was there with Jacques. We had to run to the airport, hiding. It was crazy. But anyway, the people now, fans in the US, in Austin, I was completely surprised that people knew the name of the team bosses. They recognized top engineers, not just the drivers. And you had a lot more fans attending this race than I've ever seen. And this is Netflix. This is the Netflix effect. So I think this is where F1 has been absolutely visionaries and brilliant. It was by creating the product, or actually developing the product, thanks to digital OTT and product like this.
You know, that's an interesting mention, because I remember it's probably 2019, maybe summer of 2019. I was in Houston and I was at a meeting with Shell, and I knew there was going to be a couple of guys from London there. And I was like, oh yeah, a 20-year fan of Formula One. I was like, London, we're talking Formula One. Like, finally I can not talk about like college football. We can talk Formula One. And so we're in the meeting, we're kind of waiting for everybody to show up. And I was like, from London, tell me about what you're doing. And I was like, Formula One fan? And the guy was kind of like, yeah, kind of. The guy from Houston was like, oh my gosh, I had just come back from a business trip, and, I was waiting to get on the plane. It took forever to take off, and, we had all sorts of delays. And I was watching this Drive to Survive thing on the flight, and he was like, I'm as soon as this meeting's over, I'm leaving to go back to my hotel so I can go finish the season.
Yeah.
He's like, I have no idea that this thing existed. And I was like, okay, all the people from London have really no idea what it is. This guy from Houston is like an instant fan from one flight, and
yeah.
I love that. And it's everywhere now. So
yeah, the thing is, what was a bit shocking, I don't know if it is the word, but disturbing, is the fact that, they were treating some little stories and blew it into a big story or episode. And that was something that F1 was not used to. Our little world in this paddock was not used to that. And the way they treated the stories were, it's a Netflix episode. They need to sell. They need to create something exciting. So there was a lot of, everybody was on the back foot. After the third season, I think it's the third season, everybody was more like, okay, let's have a meeting with Netflix. We want to make sure that we are in the episode, how we create story. We even teams. I remember we had a meeting with Netflix where we were actually brainstorming and telling Netflix, we should, what about this story? What do you think about this? We could give you access to that. Totally the opposite from day one, where it was like, oh, Netflix coming, just hide, don't say anything. It very interesting. In just 2 years, two, three seasons, it changed the sport completely.
It did. So, okay, all the current events aside, how did you get into motorsports? Like, what's your origin story? Were you always a fan of Formula One? Were you always a fan of racing, or did you fall into it, or what?
There was cars and motorsport was always close to my universe because of a family. My godmother were involved in rallying and stuff. But personally, you knew that Formula One was even in the 90s was quite big. It was Prost, it was Senna, it was all these big names. And you could not think, one day I'll be working for this sport, because it was so distant. It's like, I don't know, if you say I want to work in Hollywood and you suddenly, work directly with with Brad Pitt. It doesn't exist. It's so far,
Right.
But that said, I've landed in an agency, PR agency, it was called at the time, which was involved in motorsport and cross-country rallying. They were doing the PR for Mitsubishi in Paris-Dakar. And is it okay if I mention some brands?
Always, yeah.
So they were sponsored. The Mitsubishi back then was sponsored by a brand called Rothmans. It's a cigarette brand.
Yep.
And Rothmans decided in '93 to change completely a strategy. It was extremely clever. It was under the lead of a guy called Johan Rupert. And this Johan Rupert, funny enough, who owned Rothmans back then, is now the owner also of Richemont. I mentioned Richemont Group earlier, Cartier and everything, IWC, so it's the same guy, funny enough. But anyway, so this guy is a visionary and is extremely talented business guy. Decided that it was more efficient to promote a brand, to bring all the sponsorship under one roof, a very powerful roof, and they decided on an international sport, which was working everywhere in the world, and they went to Formula One. And the agency I was working with as a very junior PR guy, I was doing photocopies overnight, to make sure that the press, Ryan, you wouldn't even think. We were sending press releases by fax, man, that existed back then. Oh. So this is how I landed in the sport, because Rothmans signed a deal with Williams.
Yep.
And then they needed a guy who could speak the language, who was young and completely free to travel the world and actually send faxes from the other side of the planet back to the journalist to share the stories. But it was already storytelling, it was about sharing the story, giving it some. Actually, it was the first kind of behind the scenes strategy. We were giving stories that were not only reporting about the performance of the car and the sporting aspect. I had a bit of freedom back then in this agency and started to develop what we call the lifestyle aspect. So I did the first ever fashion shoot with a model in the paddock. Then this developed into a lot of other kind of cases where, for example, bringing art and Formula One together. That's actually brought me to become a PR guy, but it was more a marketing thing at the end, because it was more it was not just reporting, but it was creating strategic stories, topics that was actually relevant to the brands that I was working for. So this is how I started in the sport. I started to travel around the world, making friends. And Formula One, I always said, Ryan, it's extremely hard to get in, but it's hard to get out. And what I mean by that is that once you're in, you have this kind of Formula One tattoo there. So when you arrive into another kind of world business, you say, hi, I work in Formula One, I like to join your company. You say, no, first of all, you work in F1, so you don't understand what the real world is about, because you travel the world constantly. And two, you work with budgets that are far from what we can even think about, etc. So it's extremely hard from a perception point of view. I'm not saying it's the reality, but from a perception point of view. But it's true that Formula One is a very small group of people traveling the world in the paddock. I call it the circus. It's exactly like your circus. You go, you put your show on Sunday night, you fold everything, you go to the next country, and this is how it works. But it's I created my network in the sport like this. Created some very cool events. And this is how I made it into the sport, I guess. And maybe I was a nice guy too. I don't know.
Yeah, you are. Maybe you weren't back then, but you are today. So. Yeah. How does this whole Rothman Williams evolve into your relationship with Jacques?
Yeah, very. I mean, like the role. It was exactly that. Rothmans decided that they already had this in the concept that in order to reach through the sponsorship, which has a massive visibility potential. Formula One was viewed by millions around the world on TV. It was huge in the press, but the target consumers were not specifically, we talked about this earlier, not specifically interested in the number of they were not tech guys. Right. So what stories, or how do you actually leverage the sponsorship in such a way that you reach the interest of the target consumers? And that was their strategy. And this is why they allowed us to create innovative. If I say things now, people who are younger audience that are watching the show, they're going to think I'm crazy. But it's, it was like the lifestyle aspect, which how to bring the sport into lifestyle publications. For example, the wallpaper, Vogue, whatever, which are not motorsport press. And how did, that was the starting point. I created the first ever distribution of press releases via email. There were 25 people in there, Brian. It took hours to send a stupid email. We created the first Formula One website in '97 with the team. So these are things that, actually we did thanks to the freedom we had from Rothmans and working with the agency. And then because I did this, I was actually poached by Lucky Strike, another cigarette brand, which also the strategy was exclusively non-motorsport, and they really liked the lifestyle aspect and the storytelling and how we actually ended up talking about, with Formula One drivers, talking about other topics such as, training, art, music. So we developed, at the time, very funny story. I'll give you a couple of examples just to make it a little bit more tangible. But, for example, there was one guy, he was the gearbox technician at BA Art when we under Lucky Strike, so a mechanic. And this guy was extremely discreet, didn't speak much during race weekends. He was doing his job really, really good. But we discovered that between races, he was staying between races with his camera, and he was taking pictures of landscapes, beautiful pictures. Put that aside for now. Another guy who was a chief mechanics was instead of using the scrapping the Formula One parts and putting them into the bin, he was taking all these parts, collecting them with the authorization of the team, of course, and he was actually creating sculptures. He was a South African guy, Alistair, sculptures of sharks. So with Formula One parts, he ended up with sculptures that side to 2 meters long. So when you had this talent in the team, we said, okay, we want to address to an audience which is interested in design, art, music, not just, racing. So we created an art gallery and we created stories which ended up in art magazines or lifestyle magazines about these guys. We involved the drivers then and to talk about this, and we ended up doing crazy stuff, with massive guys from the art, Julian Opie as an artist, or Hussein Shalayan as a designer. So these story pieces ended up in those lifestyle publications. We didn't have social media, but the content was, the idea was the same. If we had social media, we would have published this content on social. And this is how we actually used sponsorship to address a specific kind of audience. But, it was the strategy. It didn't happen by magic. It was defined specifically, saying this is what we want to reach. And actually, it was very interesting because the board of those big companies were very clever guys and very serious guys. They didn't want to know if we had a nice party the night before, or if we enjoyed some time with a journalist or whatever. They wanted to know the numbers. So we always produced, on the basis of those very cool events, a few slides with numbers to show a lot of data. We've put a lot of money behind research at the time, to prove that it was working. And actually, it was working. I remember with Just Lucky Strike, we raised the spontaneous awareness of the brand within 6 years by 40%. So
wow.
What is the spontaneous awareness? Basically, if you ask the question, name me a brand in the sport, or name me a tobacco brand in the sport, where do you rank, compared to the competition, and how quickly the brand comes into your target audience mind. This is how we did the research at the time. We evaluated the sponsorship at the time. Today you would do this online, so basically you would probably post something, you would see how the engagement, you would see the number of views, you would take all these data, but the concept, the approach is the same. It's just that we didn't have the same tools, but it's the same job. And this is how I evolved into being in the second team. And earlier I said that I was with Jacques most of these days, because he was at Williams and he was also at BAR. We created that relationship, and this is why when the tobacco sponsorship was actually banned from the sport at the end of 2006, it was actually a regulation, no more tobacco in the sport. Then I continued the journey with Jacques into other teams, Sauber, not to name the company.
So what is that like? Is it just, are you Jack's most trusted guy? Like, obviously you have this connection with each other.
Yeah.
Does the relationship begin because, look, it's a cutthroat world, and, it's such a competitive environment for people that, a driver might have one or two people that they trust on a team.
Yeah.
Was that you? Like, is that how this partnership started?
Yes, it's like in any kind of relationship, Ryan. I'm sure if we hang around maybe a couple of days, maybe we become best mates, but it's just, he could trust me because, first of all, because we spent quite a lot of time together at races and stuff, and we got to know each other, and I think you need that element of trust, because a Formula One driver is a little star. There are it's highly demanding, I guess, like any kind of top athlete. There's a lot of work with the engineers, a lot of work in the car as an athlete to train, a lot of work with the sponsors, a lot of work with the media. So it's a huge commitment, personal commitment. You need a lot of energy, a lot of concentration as an athlete to be able to sustain that in Formula One. And I always said, if a good Formula One driver is not just good behind the wheel, because actually you've got extremely good drivers which are, behind the wheels, they are killers, but they're not. If they're not good with sponsors, they don't go anywhere. If they're not good with delivering their feedback or talking to the engineers, they don't go anywhere. An F1 driver has to be extremely clever, because what they talk about when they are debriefing after a session with the engineers I always said, going to a Grand Prix is like sending you see this Apollo, sending the rocket and everything goes wrong,
Yeah.
The amount of people at base trying to find a solution. Remember that moment where they're trying to find this carbon dioxide filter. This is Formula One on a daily basis. This is what a Formula One team goes through every day. It's a rocket to the moon every day. It's unbelievable. And the drivers need to be at this level when they are not in front of the media. So talking correctly, telling the right things, making sure they have a good image, etc. Because like this, they have a better relationship to their sponsors. And also, one day you have to talk to a CEO, the next day you have to be on TV, the day after you're with the engineers, and sometimes everything is on the same day. Then you need to close the helmet and concentrate on racing, which is just mental. The amount of commitment you have to put into this moment behind the wheel. So I think a Formula One driver needs to be a complete equation, of all these all these points. And I think Jacques was one of these. He's extremely clever, sometimes a bit too clever. So he's a bit way too like a bit mini Einstein. Sometimes, you know, he's able to build a computer from scratch and to create to run programs and create programs and connect. He's unbelievable with IT. You know, for example. That's that's how he is.
That was a tough time for him too. The BRA. I'm sorry, the BAR, Albert, like, he kind of gone to the top right away. And then I think, you know, like most drivers struggled. I think BAR, I don't know why I have so much trouble saying that, had a lot of challenges, I think, just engineering wise. And Sauber, I think they hadn't quite hit their stride yet. It came shortly after that, didn't it, with BMW?
Yeah, well, BAR, interesting. Well, first of all, Jacques' career. He's still one of the only guy who won Indy. He won the 500. He won Formula One. He participated in Le Mans, and I think he did pretty well. So he didn't win it, but he's a unique profile in the sport. But people say sometimes that he had a reversed career. He started extremely high and then dropped. I think he committed personally and without any kind of second thought to the BAR project. But you cannot create a team from scratch and become competitive in the sport from one day to another. The teams that are winning today are the same teams that were winning in the past years.
Right.
Actually, 4 teams win. Ferrari, now it's Mercedes, Red Bull. You can count them and look at how the different, even 20 years. It's always those 3 to 4 teams, and usually these teams have a lot of experience, so they've been there for a long time. Williams is, I'm sure they will come back, but you know, again, these teams have been there for long, and they have the world championships on their record. When it comes to BAR, you have the funny anecdote is, again, people want things to go so quickly, but what really happened is that BAR was sold after 2006 to Honda. So the car is always developed, you know, the previous year for the year. So in 22 we developed the car for 23. You see what I mean? So when it was sold to Honda, it was there. They started to score a few points, a few podiums and stuff. And then Honda decided to sell the company. They said they didn't want to be in the F1 anymore. They didn't want this anymore. They sold this company for £1, $1. 4 people. One of them was Ross Brown.
Yep.
And when he got the team, the car was completely blank. If you look at the 2009.
2009, yep.
And they win the championship because the car was absolutely fantastic. So Honda, all these years invested, and Honda sold a fantastic car. So this thing from $1 became a very valuable company because they got all the prize money of a Formula One champion, and they sold to Mercedes. And Mercedes continued, to develop and became world champion quickly after. It took a couple of years to achieve this, 2-3 years. So I think you have to look at on a much, take the helicopter view and look what BAR, it was tough, yes, they were losing rear wings on straights in Australia, it was really, there was really some problems there, but then the team consolidated and created and developed and became bigger and bigger and better people, better managed, and now it's a top team. So it's a different name, it's managed differently, but it's the same team.
You actually in your kind of prep notes, you mentioned something that that I thought was a really good topic. Maybe we've kind of skimmed over the top of it a smidge, but you kind of raised the question about how the sport survived 2020. And I think when you look at the sport and you look back at 2008, that's when Honda stepped away because of the financial crisis of 2008. And the sport was fine. It adapted, and there were some weird times with, what USF1 that never materialized. They never made it to the grid. You had Super Aguri, who was kind of just not quite there.
Yeah.
And that was, you mainly saw the financial crisis affect the big publicly traded global companies, that needed stock support. They had to exit a lot of those kind of frivolous investments, if call it that.
Yeah.
But 2020 was a global effect, and you think about the sport of Formula One, it's not just, can we figure out how to function in the UK, because it's a European sport. Mm-hmm. How can we manage 10 teams from across the globe on racetracks across the globe, moving people from country to country to country? They nailed it with virtually no. When you think about it, you're a commercial guy, like, how long it takes to get a business to turn. It's like an aircraft carrier, and you got them to basically delay the sport, like 2 months from its official start date, and business as usual. Quite frankly, one of the most exciting seasons I've seen. And
business as usual. Behind the scenes, it was actually twofold. The first one was not knowing, and not knowing was reacting, adapting. And I think people can become extremely clever when they're under pressure, and with that kind of situation, we reacted super fast. Where I told my team, I said, guys, how do we keep our fans engaged without cars on the track, and how do we keep delivering value to sponsors? So we shifted everything on digital, and basically because everybody started to be extremely clever and played the game, and then everybody at home was helping in creating content, and even drivers creating content on their own, sending us the content, etc. So this is how we actually started to, without going into too much details, but actually we ticked the first box. So we actually managed to create to keep that engagement level, and we talked about esports, I think earlier. That was another aspect, but that was digital. It's basically engaging online. And then the second aspect was delivering the value to the sponsors. And we could not host anybody on the track. So we had, again, to create content for them on their behalf, to make sure that we could actually give them their access. And we created things like the we call it virtual experience. We talked about experience, and you're completely right, Ryan, this experience of being at the racetrack. We created the virtual experience, which was basically accessing the behind the scenes online, like maybe this tool or some others, but which allowed people from all around the world who were guests of our sponsors to actually experience meet and greet with the drivers, conversations with the drivers, have garage tours. We developed live garage tours and so on. So we actually kept the ball rolling like this. It was not as smooth as as you can imagine. Everybody was a bit challenging, saying we also under pressure, and we had to act like a big family. Everybody was on the same boat, so we actually reduced cost wherever we could. We adapted to everybody's financial situation, but we made it through. And then I think what was making the sport to run again was the fact that we could actually run in the completely closed off environment. Could control who was getting in and out. So it was basically at the beginning, it was just a limit. F1 has limited the number of people who could actually come to the track. And it was only operational, pure operational, not even, hospitality, nothing, because we had hospitality just to feed the mechanics. Anything else was actually banned. So we could actually control, people going in and out. Everything was done in very controlled way, from the factory to the track and back. I think we raced in the 5th of July in 2020. So we lost 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
3 to 4 months, during which it was a big question because we didn't know and no one knew. But I think where F1 was really strong was again with bringing all the teams together, delivering a calendar, readjusting the calendar was absolutely. And the amount of work was crazy behind the scene, and everything online, with no meetings and all that. But I think this is going back to what I said earlier about this engineering. F1 is managed by engineers. Huh? You have to think that we are the marketing guys promoting the sport, but behind the 550 people, my team was 20. We're 20 marketing, communication, digital. The rest is all engineers and technicians. So I think in the situation like this, F1 has the ability to find solutions which would be for any normal person would be impossible just to conceive it. But I think the mind of these people have this mind where they actually can see things and go over difficulties and problems much more easily than people like me could do. So I think this is probably why F1 has managed to go through this period of time.
Well, they've crushed it digitally too, I think, in the last 5 years. I mean, Drive to Survive aside, I think that's brought in a lot of new fans and a lot of new markets that they hadn't addressed before. But like the F1 TV app, I mean, the fact that I can engage the sport in the way that I do just down here, I've got my live stream, I've got my data feeds here. It's like I have the pit wall in my living room and, I get to experience it and to do things like, if there's a huge battle, I can pull the two drivers on the two sides and just take their in-helmet feed or their, you can get the race feed and you can watch them go along with the live stream. I struggled for a long time trying to justify, do I want to go to a race? Because it's like, I get this experience. I don't have to worry about crowds or traffic or any of that stuff. And, and it's costly. And, of course I went and it was like, wow, it's even on the side of the track, it's amazing. Mm-hmm. But, the experience side, it's a really closed off sport at the track. I went to an IndyCar race and you can get everywhere, and if you know somebody, you can get anywhere in front of anyone at the track. I mean, they wheel the cars through the crowd to deliver them to the track. So you get a really up close and personal experience with it. Where Formula One, I was at Austin, and of course I've made a lot of contacts on the show, and I was like, hey, I'm at the track. What's up? They're like, oh, nothing. If you want to meet for coffee out of the track later, it's totally fine.
They get an answer already. That's an achievement.
They're happy to go meet you off site, but you can't get anywhere without those passes. It's really closed off. But you're so close to the track and that experience anyway that it doesn't really matter. It's so much fun.
So it's a different experience, right? And I think, for the audience, funny thing is what you see on TV or on your app is the same feed that you have on the screens on the pit wall and in the garage.
Right.
So when you see everybody watching the screens, they're watching the same thing than you, except that they're in the middle of a garage. Having said that, I would say it's a different experience because you probably don't see the race the same way, but you see something different and as exciting. Again, the colors, the noise, the atmosphere, the tension, the pressure, this is something like this. But yeah, you're right. It's a very exclusive sport. I think it was built like this, and I compare it to luxury brand. Luxury brand, you don't get it on the, behind the counter at, give me a Walmart or something, or you see what I mean? You don't buy a Rolex like that. You go into, sometimes you have to be invited to have a special access to a special model. It's an experience, the whole customer experience. And I think F1, if you want to compare it to another product, would be a luxury product. It's not accessible, but still,
That's what drives value, right?
I think so.
I mean, you can't charge $10,000 for a paddock pass if everybody can get their buddies back there, Yeah,
then it's not the same sport. Then it's not the same. The exclusivity aspect raised the value of the sport. This is what Ecclestone has understood very quickly. He first understood the promoter aspect, so basically the television, where the money was in television. Then he understood the restrictive and exclusive aspect, which actually created the value for brands wanted to get into the sport. A few years back, it was, if you didn't have a minimum amount of million on the table, you couldn't even speak to a Formula One team. It was that kind of approach. Now, I would say yes, you don't get because it's not cheap, but you have a lot more flexibility because teams have adapted to the market.
So I'm really glad that you're here now with this. I'm going to pull in a current event here, so I'm going to tread lightly and do the same. Okay, so we just recently had the political speech ban at the races, and I agree with that rule. So I'm going to start with that. How does a rule like that affect sponsors? Because I know sponsors will drive initiatives and conversations like, hey, like if we're a crypto company, we don't want drivers out bashing crypto and FTX and all these things that are happening. But like how does something like that affect your job as kind of on the commercial end of the business? Because there are some companies out there that want drivers that are pushing those initiatives forward. So like, how does all that play, or does it not affect your role at all?
First of all, there's some contractual parameters between teams and brands, and there's a whole list of clauses that actually define exactly where are the limits, and I think this is normal. Number two, a driver is an ambassador of, if at Sauber when I left, we had over 50 brands, 50 partners, so you cannot support one or go in the direction of one without actually compromising the other one. So you have to be extremely clever in the way you manage the relationships, and but you probably want to stay away from that because how can I say it? I'll say it differently. You find today brands, and I'm talking, let's say, in sustainability, for example, you find brands that do a lot in terms of sustainability, environmental initiative, etc., but they don't promote it because some aspect of some of their initiatives might be not relevant or confronting with with another aspect of their business or another customer they have on another side of the of the planet or whatever. So I guess this is extremely controlled. This is extremely thought through from scratch because we have those contracts. But I think that you want to avoid creating, a mess in your family. So there are some topics that you probably don't want to bring forward, and for sure, it's not the role of an athlete of this caliber to start entering into those kind of conversations. First of all, Ryan, this is a show. We're this is another. It's not show business, but it is a show. By the way, the company which owns F1 is this Liberty Media is
yes.
That's their job. So it's a show. We cannot consider this as a political tool or whatever. It's already difficult enough because sometimes we go racing in countries where you have controversies, where you have political issues, whatever. It's you are sponsors, suddenly become. You realize that the sponsor did something. That was not correct or whatever. It's difficult enough. So you don't want you want to keep it as a show. It's entertainment, and
I agree. I think it takes the weight off of everybody. You think of Mercedes having to, I imagine there's a clause in there for Lewis to be able to do what he wants to do, and rightly so. But then that's a huge weight on Mercedes to be like, okay, I know this isn't our contract, but look, we're in this area. It's a very heavy topic. We have 50 sponsors or partners that we're working with, and we can't offend anybody. Now it's the sport coming down and saying, yeah, it's us. Don't go yell at Toto. Come to us. And it takes the weight off of everybody to have to define that. Plus, nobody wants to watch a race. You've seen the NBA, their ratings have tanked. The NFL, their ratings have tanked because of, initiatives of athletes, trying to bring these things to the forefront of a bunch of fans that really just want to be entertained. And not, they want to escape. I want to watch a basketball game to escape the news, the world.
Exactly.
My life, whatever it is. So I think it's a good rule. Now, I think it's overarching. I don't know if it steps into their personal lives, which I think then that weight comes back down on the sponsors, but and the team.
Ryan, I think in F1, first of all, you don't have that. It's not like an NFL where we have, 52 players, if I'm correct, per team. NBA, I don't know. Soccer is 25. Here you have 20 drivers.
Yeah.
So first of all, you can control. I'm not saying it's easy.
Right.
The
easier.
numbers are small compared to the audience and what this thing is generating in terms of eyeballs or interaction. But it's just 10 teams, 20 drivers. You've got profiles that have been in the sport. You're not a Formula One driver by chance, and you usually take people like Charles Leclerc. You have pictures of him when he was like 6 behind the wheel of a go-kart, racing with Gasly, and so on. They are, I'm not trying to be negative, but they are formatted. They are extremely, the most professional people in all the kind of meaning. They are extremely professional in every aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Leclerc going to Ferrari. I remember how he was at Sauber when I joined in 18, and I was talking to him and some of his entourage and people around. I said, "Oh my God, the amount of pressure he must get when he gets to Ferrari. It's another world. It's for a driver." And they were like, "And?" So it's not. I'm not putting everything down. It's just that they are mentally prepared. And this is just an evolution of their career. They end up at Ferrari, and the guy is instantly good, instantly performing. He's stepping in another car with a huge company, huge pressure, and the guy delivers and performs. So I think what I want to say by this is that all the drivers who are in the paddock have this ability to understand what to do, what to say, when to do, when to say. All these, they have also. So you don't really need to put them into a box and say, do's and don'ts. They're clever enough. Some other sports, let's say we just came out of the World Cup. You don't have that level of mental capacity. I'm sorry, it's not. They're great guys. They're extremely good on the pitch, on the field, but they don't have the same background. To be an F1 driver, you need to be an extremely good engineer, a very good communicator, a very good business guy. Because remember, when they started their career, they had to find their sponsors themselves, so they understand business. They have a huge network. They're unbelievable. These guys, compared to other sports.
I couldn't agree more. I think they've been preparing for this most of their life. And the young drivers that I have on the show, I mean, these kids are doing their own marketing, they're doing their own sponsorships, they're doing their own kind of brand ambassador roles. It's really neat to see. I wasn't like that when I was a kid, so it's amazing to see young people like that. So we'll pull it back into a lighter conversation here. But, okay, so something that I ask everybody, and, I think fans just get excited about this kind of stuff. Like, what was your pinch me moment in Formula One? Like, what happened where you were just like, how on earth did I end up in this life, this role, this position? Like, what was probably the most exciting thing that's happened in your career in motorsports?
I was extremely lucky because I had. It was not a job. It was not a job. I didn't take any holidays for 16 years in a row because I didn't need a holiday. I didn't need to break. I know it was. Imagine when you're a young guy in your 30s and you work with a Formula One driver and you travel the world I have to say it, but it's the reality. Helicopters, private jets, 5-star hotels, and your friends are, Hollywood stars and so on. And this is, so it's not reality. That's what you need to be careful about because this is not real life. But it's extremely enjoyable, and so I don't think there was specific moments. There were specific moments, but probably they're not too. I'll probably tell you privately. But I think the whole it's just mental. It's just crazy. The whole thing. You're traveling the world for the most of the year, being in touch with the most incredible people, working with even dealing with sponsors. Even today, you meet CEOs of companies, people who have created unbelievable businesses. You meet. Marketeers, you meet people, you are constantly challenged with the highest level of what's available on the planet. From athletes to guests, to sponsors, to your colleagues. It's high end all the way. Except that, like any shows, and I'm sure people will relate to that, behind the curtain is not as clean and not as neat as the front stage.
Yeah.
So you cannot sustain that life for a very long time because it's a huge compromise. It's like you can forget your private life, you can forget your friends, your family, kids, etc. And when this comes across, then you start to have a conflict because it's just high end. Look at the driver, like the guy behind you, Carlos, for example. The amount of work that these guys after the season they go testing. After this, they have PR days or we call it PR days, promotional days with sponsors. Then it's a non-stop. So
right.
You have to get ready for this. But for me, attending. Meeting people like Ayrton Senna, ending up into on the grid of the Monaco Grand Prix with a top models, which is super because it's always nice. Things like this. It's just, it's crazy. But again, it's a high price that you have to pay personally. Huh? You don't.
Yeah,
it's not just fun. Huh? It's a huge commitment.
I think so many people forget that. I always say that, I've watched Drive to Survive. I thrive in pressure. I come alive in pressure. Like if there's no pressure around me, I get bored, and I watch Drive to Survive and the team principles, and I see that pressure, and I'm just like, that's my dream job. Like that would be great. A driver manager, that'd be great. But when people ask me about that, I say, not until the kids are in college and self-sustainable and, doing all that, because, if I can't take my wife on a plane with me around the world and do that, it just doesn't work, because the sacrifice is real. And I've had people on the show that, they're perpetually single, they're always on a plane, they're running ragged, young lady I had on the show is like, occasionally I have to sit in the stairwell and cry because it's just like, that. And then you hike up your pants and you go. And, and you get back.
It's like this. First of all, you have to realize this, as you said, the sacrifice, the fact that you're constantly with a group of people. So, if you go back home and you go to the bar or a party and they say, "What have you done today?" and you explain that, I was, I was with the CEO of a major company or whatever, Red Bull on the grid of the race, and then we had dinner with this guest and so on. It's like, but I was at the office. So then you start creating a distance between these two worlds. So you're disconnecting yourself socially with the real world. So that's a bit dangerous. And I think a lot of people have gone too deep, and they cannot. I still see people in the paddock in 2022, which were here in '94.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is also the fact that it's not just high-end hotels and business class flights. Our mechanics, most of the people, actually, not just the mechanics, but most of even ourselves, at Sauber Marketing, we were all traveling economy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you saw the flights when you have to go Mexico to Abu Dhabi, or it's just. It's tough on the body. It's tough on the mental. It's high end. What we said earlier, it's high. Everything is high end. Everything is extreme high end.
It's the stakes are high. Yeah. I think there's always a trade off to have that life, and I agree. I think it's amazing. One of the things I do like about this show is just to really, some people get caught up in the glitz and glam, and they say, "Oh, I want to work in Formula One because I see it on TV, I see it on Drive to Survive, and it looks amazing." And while it is, there's the trade-off that you describe, and I think it's important for young people to hear, that there is a trade-off. It's just like Hollywood, Yeah. Personally, I would never want to be a celebrity like that with no private life. I want to be able to go to Walmart and shop without having people come up to me. We were at Austin this year, and after I think the Friday test sessions or practice sessions, we went to Target to go get a bunch of water and stuff for our Airbnb, and half of the McLaren garage was in doing the same thing, and people just they see the shirt and they attack. These are hospitality people, or they're not, it's not Andreas or, Daniel. It's, just a hospitality person or probably, somebody, in the garage that nobody really knows, but they just get enamored by that and attack it. And I think that's a trade-off you really have to consider when arriving at that. What advice do you have for young people that
first of all, as a team, and you look compared to two things. When I started in the 90s, we had 16 to 18 races a year. Started in March, ended up end of October. Now you've got 22, 23, 24. It's they want to do more. So we're probably going to be ending up, if you just take 25 weekends, it's half of the year.
Yeah.
52 weeks. So more and more you're going to be challenged to go into this kind of life where you actually forget about the rest. You're either on the plane or at the racetrack. And we actually in the last 3 years we saw a lot more turnover in the race team than ever before, especially with the mechanics, for example. So the young generation are not are conscious enough to preserve their private life and to say, look, I want to be able to be with my family, girlfriend, or because this is too much, and it's creating a challenge for the teams because they have to think differently on how they operate. Teams probably with 25 races probably will have to multiply the number of people so you can rotate employees within each team so that you preserve the quality of life, the life of some people. And so this is something that is coming. I mean, actually, we at Sauber we already started to rotate a few people. Remember in marketing, I was rotating some communications people already in order not to kill them. Because it never stops. So, an advice for my advice is think about your real life.
Mm-hmm.
This is a job. You can be passionate about it, but I think for me is the most important is that you don't disconnect yourself from your, the real world. Keep the connections with your friends, with your family. Go back to the real world between events, in order not to go completely nuts and disconnected. Because the problem is the disconnection is fun while it's lasting, but when you come back to the real world, then it's a real shock because you don't know how to manage things.
Yeah, I think that's actually advice I've never had on the show before, and I think that's really solid to think of. You're, call it a quasi-celebrity, just sheer nature of being in Formula One. I mean, I'm sure you get it on social media. Everybody wants to connect to you because you're part of the sport. People want to engage. You're the most interesting person in a room, when you're out. And I think when that goes away, like any Hollywood celeb would not be relevant anymore. I think that's hard for people to function in. And I think that's a really good topic. If I'm used to going to Target, after the race and I'm getting, people all over me, and then all of a sudden I go to Target and nobody knows who I am. I think if you lose your identity in the process of, you call it your pinch me moment of life, you have a really tough transition. So that is good advice. That's wise.
Yeah, but you also have you have people who are strong enough to say, okay, I'm going to do a few years because I just want to have fun. I'm going to give it all out, and then just take the experience, and then they can say and then they move along and they do something else. We have people like that who actually can come in and out, mentally switching, and actually enjoying moment when they're in and enjoying the moment when they're out as well, saying, oh, I had a good time, it was fun. But so you have different kind of profiles. But I saw people struggle I know I'm not a psychologist, but I saw people really struggle when they got out of the sport because exactly that, they were not that mini celebrity anymore. And I called them, I used to call them the fireworks because they go high with a lot of noise, extremely fast, and they explode. And when the explosion is finished, they disappear.
So and there we go.
And voilà, so that's one. So I've seen a lot of people like this. They create a lot of noise, but they disappear.
Man, Jan, seriously, I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure you know Mark from your time at Albert.
We have the same hairdresser.
Yeah, but you also have the same kind of really engaging personality with just a multitude of stories and just stuff that people are interested in hearing about. You have to come back on. I think the audience begins to glaze over after an hour and a half, 2 hours. So we have to stop it. But I think that we have to get you on the show again.
Sure.
And I think when you hit this next season of what you're doing, I really want to have you back on to, talk about that, but also unpack some of the stuff we really couldn't unpack and the amount of time. And this is every episode. When I send the invites out, people are like, an hour and a half? I don't really know about that. And then we get in here and it's 2 hours later and you're like, wait, we got to be done? So you've been just a wealth of knowledge. Mark was one of my favorite shows, and you're right there. You're very well spoken. You feel like you've done this before. The commercial side is really easy for me to talk about because it's business. Engineering is more inquisitive for me, but business is my home, my happy place. All that to be said, you got to come back on. We have to bother you for another hour and a half sometime soon and hear about this next season of yours.
With pleasure. Anytime.
I had fun.
Yeah,
I really had a lot of fun.
It was really cool. Yeah.
And this is the fascinating part of the business. So
I'm sorry to your audience if my English is not super fluid, but I hope I could I could transfer a few ideas, and a few notions out there. But yeah, absolutely delighted of this moment, and if anytime we could discuss a few topics. It could be on a regular basis if you want.
Yes. Let's do that. In America, we all love an accent. So
yes,
maybe I come across like that to other people, but I'm like, gosh, this Yankee can't even pronounce half the names, half the tracks, just get him talking about the sport. Let's not get specific. It's is it Charles? Is it Charles? Is it Chuck?
Yeah.
How do we actually pronounce this guy's name? So I appreciate it, and I know the fans do too. And you've been awesome, and a big chunk of my audience is from the U.S., but I think 45% of it is Canada, Australia, UK, and I can't remember what the other one is, but you're in good company. You're awesome. Let's make this regular.
Thank you, Ryan.